Why don't we made more modest houses? There were attempts, but when all the costs, especially land, were taken into account, modest standalone houses ended up costing almost as much as bigger houses unless they were built in places where housing is cheap to begin with and very few people want to live. If you want modest affordable-ish housing in places that have decent jobs, you need to build large apartment complexes. Throughout most of the 20th century, family of 4 lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. Bunk bed for the kids, master for the parents. People staying overstayed on the couch if they could because this isn't ideal. If you can afford a more comfortable living arrangement, then why wouldn't you have one? There's more profit to be made in luxury units, homes and apartments, than there is in modest homes. This means the development companies that build these things in mass focus almost entirely on the luxury housing market. New house sizes in the US are getting smaller right now. HTTPS. Profit. Building a 3000 SQFT house vs 1500 SQFT house is like 20-40 more, not double, but you can sell it for 60-80 more. Most the cost is land, foundation, and roof. It's even cheaper if the larger house is 2-story. That's why you rarely see large single-story houses anymore. Land is the expensive part. Once you've bought the land, you might as well make a big house on it. To make small houses economically viable, you put them on a tiny plot of land. So tiny the houses are touching. These are called townhouses. Townhouses are a fantastic idea, but they violate zoning laws in many places. Why? The people who own the big houses all get together and complain that townhouses make their properties less valuable. Why are they so defensive about their property value? Because their house is their main investment. Many people use their house as a huge part of their retirement plan. Why? Because politicians gutted unions and public pensions in the middle of the last century. Why did politicians gut unions and public pensions? Because huge companies made huge donations to those politicians. It all comes down to corporations buying politicians. I like smaller houses. It means less work cleaning and less energy cost. I mean, it depends more on where you live. Like, I can buy a 1-bedroom house for $25,000 to $30,000. The house we're renting now is $40,000 to $50,000, and it's 3 bedrooms. But I live in a small city without many jobs. And I live in the ghetto. Bigger cities and better neighborhoods equal more expensive. A 1-bedroom crack shack in downtown New York could end up costing more than $1 million. The problem is that, while everything gets more expensive, you could get a 1-bedroom house back in the olden days for a few $1,000s. Wages haven't kept up with inflation since the 70s. Hell, federal minimum wage hasn't even gone up since the early 2000s. So, housing costs too much in general, and most people can't afford it with their current employment. Because where I live, might be able to get a $25,000 crack shack, but $12 an hour is considered a lot where I live. So it evens out. Some large builders are now building small houses in some markets. Lennar is one. I've seen their floor plans online as small as 1,000 SQFT for new construction. It costs about the same to build a 3-bedroom ranch house that it does to build a 5-bedroom McMansion. But the profits for building the McMansion are about twice. The only way you will see modest homes built again is if either you do it yourself, or a massive think 2-300-acre housing development are built. They just built a house development here in West Phoenix off of the 202 expansion. Basically built to order houses. Very few people bought the basic house. Almost everyone bought the mid to high level house. There are a couple of things going on there. Rich idiots love casual displays of opulence, so they always buy way more than they need. Homes used to be more of a multi-generational thing, and a lot of people have memories of growing up with their grandparents in the house. That's not a bad thing at all, but it's become outmoded as now there's social pressure for everyone to own their own space. 1 bedroom each doesn't really seem like luxury, honestly. It's hardly decadent to not force the kids to share. Especially once they get a bit older, kids deserve some privacy. Kids nowadays expect more privacy than they got in years past. To get financing, a house 3-5 times the value of the raw lot needs to be built on it. And land prices are increasing for a variety of reasons. If you can only build so many houses, you're going to build big houses to maximize profit. I mean, standard of living increase and become more comfortable all the time. Were people in the 1950s wondering why we had to build all these big and expensive 1,000 square foot, 3-bed 1.5 bath houses when their parents lived in 1-room log cabins? The government wanted about $45,000 up front for me to build my house with my hands on my lot with material I buy. They also mandated I put $20,000 worth of solar and now require an additional sprinkler system that would be between K and 10K. That cost changed very little based on square footage. California. As a Dutch person, I'm often baffled by American housing programs. They built in a fully functioning decent-sized kitchen, and then the presenters were saying something like, yeah, this is a small kitchen, and I'm like, bitch, that's a normal kitchen. Houses have gotten more expensive because land has gotten more expensive. Building more modest houses won't solve the problem. What would is building more housing with less land by building more apartment buildings, townhouses, multiplexes, and even just building houses on smaller lots, but zoning regulations and the like make this very difficult. Yet you still ask for a house, not for an apartment. I totally understand why people prefer houses over apartments, but I also totally understand why people prefer more square feet house vs fewer square feet houses. What I don't understand why people look at the very short point in the past to make it sound like this used to be a norm. For the whole humanity, the norm was to live in 1-2-room house with in-laws and whole bunch of kids. And this was considered a good life too. We don't build more modest houses because in current world building more modest suburbs is not profitable. Land and infrastructure to support all of those modest houses are too expensive. If you want modest housing, advocate for apartments. Land is more and more expensive. The only way to recover the cost is to build larger homes. A 1,000 SQFT starter home might only break even. It certainly won't make as much profit as a 3,000 SQFT home. Why would you build a house that will sell for 100K when you can build one that will sell for 400K? I suspect you're not fully appreciating how much time we spend indoors now, compared to before. A small house is fine when it's only for eating, sleeping, and storing your stuff. When you actually spend your waking hours there, or worse, all of you do, finances, wealth, etc., sure. But I fear the biggest reason people want a house is to get away from their family.